Hello and welcome to The Broken Sword, your YouTube home for The Lord of the Rings and all things J.R.R. Tolkien. In today's video, we are back with part 2 of our series of The Days That Shook Middle-earth.
Build me a army worthy of Mordor.
With today's video being the second entry in our series of historical events in the broad scope of the history of which The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings comprise only a gnat's worth of time, of which events deserve a closer look at. The statues within his stories may be long forgotten, maybe not, but they stand in for the unknowable people who came, made their great monuments, waned as the afternoon sun and passed on. There is one thing you can say for certain about Tolkien's characters. They possess real depth, a personable air that radiates a genuine being behind the words and adjectives. So, since you have probably, or at least hopefully, seen part 1, which recounts the downfall of Numenor, and is a good lesson on greed for power never ending in a nice peaceful way, as, Sauron in the end was able to save his bones at the expense of his skin, like someone taking a plea deal in our own world despite being at the center of it all. But that was last time. This time we will dive a little differently into the histories, which is us having a closer look at words. Words and how they can be more powerful than the actions themselves. Today we look at the Oath of Feanor.
No long slow sleep.
You would have a queen!
Like I said, today's video focuses for once purely on the words. Not that we don't tend to look at that a lot anyway, but how powerful words are a prominent theme throughout Tolkien's works. His attention to and appreciation for the social and cultural dynamics which, though the change of language is only one potential distinction between peoples, it is a profound one. Language is so important to Tolkien, he literally said, of all the world, I will dedicate my life to this. And why? Is it seemingly mundane? Perhaps for some, but like the characters in Tolkien's fiction, our names are derivative of past words which came from languages that are now deceased. But not only does a language form part of one's idea of self, it gives expression to our soul. Indeed, Eru Ilúvatar himself brought all that is and will be into being by the way of song, words, and melodies so subtle they wove into being everything. But you might be wondering, what has all of this got to do with a day that shook Middle-earth? After all, if you think of the biggest threats that came from the early years, you are likely to go straight to the wars between gods, or the moments that changed from when Melkor and Ungoliant came to Valinor under a cloak of darkness. These are actions that almost literally shook the ground of Middle-earth. Yet, language, words, a speech, an oath, this is something that can have just as much, if not more, impact on all things. The world-shaking bit might seem underwhelming at first, but it is but a speech. A heated speech by Feanor, son of Finwe, High King of the Noldor. For those of you who do not know much about this elven family, Finwe was not just the king of the Noldor, but he was the first king of the Noldor. He was the leader who led his people from Middle-earth to Valinor in the earlier years, and he would have 3 sons and 2 daughters. 2 sons, Fingolfin and Finarfin, and 2 daughters, Findis and Irime with Indis, and 1 son with Miriel named Feanor. His son Feanor was said to be the greatest of the Noldor to have ever lived. He had incredible skill with his hands and with his words. So not only was he a truly great warrior, but he also possessed the skill to create the Silmarils themselves. Those very Silmarils that in fact led to so many wars and death throughout the years. Even the direct death of his father as Morgoth had gone to steal those Silmarils after draining the trees with Ungoliant. Feanor was certainly a genius, but it is hard to argue not a bit of a madman as well. It was not just the Silmarils he created though, as he had many other great achievements too. He forged the Palantiri, used many years later as almost like inventing the telephone in Middle-earth, followed by the Fëanorian lamps. These lamps are once described as crystals hung in a fine chain net, the crystals being ever shining with an inner blue radiance. These were crafted in Valinor, but their method was lost with the Noldor, So that flame that could not be extinguished by wind or water sadly was not a thing to last, but another example of something Feanor created that could not be copied. Just these couple of achievements though show Feanor's quality. However, like I said, he is also somewhat of a madman. He possessed rash decision making and the inability to dial it back from 11 for a moment, as that is what drives the flame inside him, and he is able to impart that same desire onto others, as a great flame is able to lend life to smaller candles if they come forward and kneel. But the published material is silent on the main point. What we have in the published The Silmarillion says only that Feanor swore a terrible oath, which is terrible for eager Feanor fans who want to hear his words if only once more. However, we did get a version of it later on. Tolkien's heroes are not always black and white heroic, and because they draw the narrative focus, this sometimes confuses the issue of whom we should root for. Whose side do we want to win? This is an important question, and one that can get really muddled and confused with the likes of Feanor. A great elf with good intentions, but perhaps an awful method of going about it. Especially when weighed against a terrible oath, for example, and all the evils entailed thereupon and ever after. So, to quote the speech itself now, we will take it from the chapter of the Annals of a Man from the History of Middle-earth series titled Morgoth's Ring. Be he foe or friend, be he foul or clean, brood of Morgoth or bright valour, Alder or Maya or aftercomer, man yet unborn upon Middle-earth, neither law nor love, nor league of swords, dread nor danger, not doom itself, shall defend him from Feanor and Feanor's king, who so hideth or hoardeth, or in hand taketh, finding keepeth, or afar casteth a Silmaril. This swear we all. Death we will deal him ere day's ending. Woe until world's end. Our word hear though, Eru Allfather, to the everlasting. Darkness doom us if our deed faileth. On the holy mountain here in witness, and our vow remember, Manwë and Vardar. The actual words might not have anything that immediately jumps out at you over someone who is just a bit angry, but when we consider Professor Tolkien's faith, his general lack of, well, appreciation for the vain and self-seeking, self-righteous among his creation, yet the deed is much fouler than words can convey meaningfully. This oath was sworn at a time that Morgoth had already taken all three of the Silmarils into his possession. Morgoth had murdered Finwe, his father, and taken his most prized possessions. Feanor and his sons swore they would not rest until this was rectified. Feanor chose to lead a great host of elves back to Middle-earth to take on Morgoth, to challenge him, and make him pay, and so they started a war. In the end though, Feanor was killed, but it was due to his 7 sons having sworn this self-same terrible oath that meant it did not die with him. Feanor had fought bravely against a force of Balrogs, but fell. But the sons of Feanor kept his words. It was tough to see, though, that the sons would take the oath as far as they needed to. This became most apparent after the actions of Beren and Luthien. These two managed to recover one of the Silmarils from the very darks of Angband, but this did not mean that it was returned to the sons. So they attacked their king for it. Not once, when they destroyed Doriath, murdering King Thingol's heir, Dior, but also at the mouths of Sirion when Dior's daughter, Elwing, took it there. These events come under the conflict known as either the Ruin of Doriath or the Second Kinslaying. And for those of you interested, the sons still did not gain the Silmaril here either, for Elwing gave it to her husband, Eärendil, who sailed with it into the west. The same Elwing and Eärendil who would be the parents of the twin half-elven sons, Elrond and Elros. With the most hideous of acts done, that did not spell the end of the oath though, as Morgoth still held 2 Silmarils. After the War of Wrath, there were just 2 of the Oath-takers still breathing and living, Maethros and Maglor. They would steal the Silmarils, but discover a damning thing when they obtained them at last. They thought it was done, they thought the oath could be put to rest. But no. Due to the evils they had committed from that very oath, they could not handle these jewels of beauty. The pain they felt in handling them would only drive them to insanity. Therefore, Maithros would throw himself, along with the Silmaril, into the depths of the earth, while Maglor threw his Silmaril into the deep ocean. And so with that, all but one of the sons of Feanor, all but one of those who took the oath, would die, and the only one who lived was said to just wander the shores of the world, unable to deal with all the loss and regrets that he held within him. So there we have it, our second entry into the days that shook Middle-earth, and how the Oath of Feanor basically cursed an entire line of elves. Feanor was without a doubt one of the greatest elves to have ever stepped foot on both Middle-earth and a man. He was one of the greatest warriors to ever draw breath, and one of the greatest smiths to ever wield a hammer. When even his grandson Celebrimbor, the one who forged the Rings of Power, knew that he could not quite match up to his grandfather, it can only emphasize just how great his skill truly was. However, with all that skill and power, there also came some maddening. He became so infatuated with the Silmarils he created that he could not stand the thought of someone like Morgoth possessing them, to the point that he would bring his own sons into an oath that would all but curse the rest of their lives. So although it was not an action like a murder itself, the words of Feanor caused more harm than many swords swung ever could, and that is why we have wanted to have a look at it for our second entry into the days that shook Middle-earth. The day of that oath changed so much that came after it. With that now though, it is time for my question of the day, which is another simple one. What would you like to see next in the days that shook Middle-earth? What incredible event, deadly event, or really unappreciated event should we focus on next? Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section below. And now to shout out our patrons. You guys are supporting our short film project. We are making great progress and I cannot thank you all enough. We have the Divine Power tier members of Kevin and Abram, the Fire Demon tier members of Nashith and Gregory, and the Wizard Staff tier members of John, Andrew, Jennifer, Hunter, and David too. You are all true legends of the Brohirrim. Finally, if you managed to reach the very end of this video with me today and you have enjoyed what you've seen, then please consider hitting that subscribe button with the bell icon too so that you can get notified of all future uploads. And so, thank you for spending just some of your time with me today, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.